Hi, and welcome to tutorial 2. I'm just going to be adding to the template, the sound to picture template that we developed in the last tutorial. And we're going to start adding specific effects and routing input channels through to specific output channels on the mixer. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create the track that I promised you in the last tutorial that I would, which would be the non-diegetic music track, but subsequently forgot to do. And so I can demonstrate this button here, which is New Tracks. As you can see, by the way, I've opened up the existing template. I've done it from my desktop rather from my template folder. But anyway, it's open up STP 25 FPS 48 kilohertz template. So when I create a new track, which is what this plus button does here, remember this one creates a new track with the duplicate settings of the highlighted track. This just creates a brand new track. And we're going to go back to our choose a file type or track type that we started in the beginning of tutorial 1. And it will always create a new track under the highlighted track. So this is why I've highlighted the bottom track. I'm going to press the plus button. And remember that choosing a file type or choose a file type. And you had all those pretty pictures, software instrument, audio, and the drummer and stuff like that. Well, that's all gone now because, like I said, Advanced Tools has been switched on, and so we just get the button and the word. So I'm just going to create the one track because I want to create a non-diegetic music track, and there it is. I'm going to label it music in brackets non-diegetic. Okay, so there we go. That's just finishing off what I promised we would start. Okay, so what I want to do now is add specific equalizations and specific compressors and other stuff to individual input channels. And remember I spoke about when this is why this particular new track with duplicate settings is very handy, because once we've loaded our timeline or our template tracks with all of the additional plugins, it's much easier then to copy that as a new track rather than create a new track and start inputting all of that stuff again. So the first thing I want us to do is I want us to click on this button here, which is Inspector. And this will, on the left-hand side of the timeline or the program, will show you the input track. So if I click on there we have it. So if I click on dialogue, there we go. It's saying, there's the dialogue. This is the stereo output. We'll look at that in a second. And so that's the input, which is this track. So if I move this, can you see it's moving the input track on the timeline and vice versa? There we go. So it's just a different view of this, like so. And we have various different things. So I won't talk about the setting just yet. That's a bit later on. But I'm going to talk about EQ. So we're going to create an EQ for dialogue. So I'm just going to double click on the EQ thumbnail, like so. And we have this dialog box which says dialogue because it's a dialogue track. And the factory default is, this is, by the way, I've either just given a face-to-face class or a blended class or a live class anyway on what EQ is. So I'm not going to go into any detail, but low frequencies, high frequencies, so very low, kind of whale sounds, very high things that only dogs can hear. And all in the middle is the stuff that we can hear. And we can manipulate the equalization to make it clear. And also, because we've got lots of sounds, I've already spoken to you about this, about sharing bandwidth. So if you have a lot of different sounds all using the same kind of EQ bandwidth, it all gets kind of merged together. So you can there's a certain amount of mixing involved in actually having different EQ patches for different types of sound. It keeps them separate in a way to stop it murky, which makes it easier to mix, and we'll be doing a project very soon, and you will certainly get a sense of that. So anyway, I'm going to click on factory default. The provenance of this Logic Pro X becomes apparent immediately when we get drums and keyboards and guitar, and yeah, I use all of this stuff, but we're looking at voice. So what kind of voice do we want? So again, most of it is to do with lead vocals or backing vocals or choirs. So I tend to use either clear vocals, yeah. So I'm going to click on that, and just look. This is what this boosts. This is high mid frequencies, and these are high frequencies, and these are low mid and low frequencies. They're gone. There's none there. So what it does, it takes some of the murkiness out. It takes some of the frequencies that make the voice slightly murky, and so hence clear. So I use that one. I also use speaking voice improve. I do not use vocal presence because that is too, well, I might have used it as a special effect, but speaking voice improve, that's quite funky. So that's boosting high, mid and high levels, and again taking the bass out. We also have things like, if you're doing this for a documentary and you've got a voiceover, you can have voiceover EQ, which is fairly similar but adds a little bit of bass because that voice pushes out. It's the dominant thing in all of the soundscape of your documentary. If you've got a voiceover, that is the testimony to a certain extent, or the vocal testimony that accompanies the visual evidence. And so we have that sort of much more kind of presence. It dips a little bit here again, because this tends to be where sound effects that are backgrounded inhabit in terms of frequency range, and so it takes that down a hint. I'll just show you what vocal presence does. There we go. That's not too bad. I've actually, maybe I'm being a bit unfair on vocal presence, but anyway, I'm going to go back and I'm going to choose which is the one I often use, which is clear vocals. Yeah, that's the one I'm going to use. Feel free to try which ones work best for you. And again, don't forget, you might be in a situation where you need a special effect of the voice to sound distorted or treated in some way, and this channel EQ is the best way to get that. And I can close that down now, and can you see, there it is, it's telling me that. And also the channel EQ is also listed in this group of effects here, which are known as insert effects. There's a difference between insert effects. Somebody sent me an email. Oh, it's about my PhD supervision that I can't do because I'm on holiday next week. And send effects. And I'm going to do a whole different class on that, a whole different little tutorial on that. So I'm going to click on this again, and I'm going to select compressor mono. All dialogue is in the center. Yeah. Do not have dialogues panning and moving around too much. There's a little bit, but again, this is a face-to-face class, so I won't waste time on this. This is just technical stuff. So factory default. Let's go down to voice, and I tend to use vocal first or studio vocal. Tube is it emulates a kind of a tube microphone. So if this microphone here is a wide diaphragm condenser mic, this is what I'm using to record this, and actually an early 90s Octava Mark 319, which I've had since the early 90s. It's my main vocal mic. That adds a bit of warmth. It's not really appropriate. There are all kinds of different, and to be honest with you, vocal stuff, compressors are, other than music compressors, are another country to me a little bit. But I'm going to go to vocal first, yeah, or vocal smooth, any of these, whichever sounds best to you. So let's have vocal first. There we go. And I'm going to switch my limiter on, and I'm going to have my threshold set at -2 dB. I could, well, really, actually, I'm going to set it at minus 6 dB because that's broadcast standard, or at least it was back in the day when we had standards. I'm sure it still is. So everything that's pushed out on television is minus 6 dB. Everything that's pushed out in music is 0 dB, and that's the limiter. So what the limiter will do is it won't allow the signal to go beyond minus 6 dB, which is there. When you consider 0 dB, dB stands for decibels, and 0 dB is like 10, yeah? 10 out of 10, that's full. Plus 3, that's like Spinal Tap going up to 11. You do, and unless you've got a very low signal that's really quiet, you really don't want to be sending anything above 0 dB. So we're going to set that at 6 dB. That's something that we're going to keep, or that's going to be something common to all of our compressors, mainly. So here we go, and I'm just going to close that down. So there we have it, channel EQ and a compressor, and that's all I'm going to need for the time being. So I'm going to repeat this for Foley now. So I'm going to go to there. Look, all of those disappeared. So I'm going to go to EQ, and Foley tends to be signal sounds. Are there any EQ tools that I can use? Most of them are, most of them are a little bit effect type to create a special effect, like telephones and megaphone effects. Part of me thinks to not use any EQ, but I will. I'm going to put in reduced sharpness. I'm going to see how that works. Remember, all of this is non-destructive. So if we want to change this according to any project that we work, we can. But reduced sharpness just takes a bit of top out. And remember, let's go back to dialogue, and let's open up dialogue. Now, can you see the top being taken out of the EQ, the EQ for the Foley stuff? That means that's not going to conflict with the top that's in dialogue. So we're not sharing those two different file types, dialogue and Foley, are not sharing frequencies, which has a tendency of making the sound altogether muddy. It's like different colors, yeah. When you're painting a canvas, and you can have your red, and then you have a line of green, and maybe you sort of do a little blend between the two, and you get that kind of greeny kind of transition. But if you take all of the colors and all put them on the same spot, what you can get is a kind of dull browny crawly green color. When you add yellow and red and blue and orange and whatever, it all ends up as a kind of murky kind of blodge of dull color. And the same happens with sound. When you put all the same frequency of sound on top of each other, you end up with overload, frequency overload, and that creates dull and sometimes distorted sound. So where possible, it's quite good to sort of separate those a little bit, which is why I think reduced sharpness is a fairly kind of mild EQ. I think that will work well for Foley, for footsteps. And again, if it doesn't work for a particular Foley, if you want crisp, reverby footsteps, you know, walking slowly in a museum, then you could just change that patch to, I don't know, EQ tools, add presence to thin sounds, and there we go. So I'm going to go back to reduce sharpness. So there we go. I can close those down. So, let's go back to Foley. There it is, reduce sharpness, and I'm going to add a compressor. So I'm going to go to, again, mono. These are all monos. We work in mono to produce stereo designs, except perhaps for Atmos and music. So I think all of them are set to mono at the minute. So I should have to show you how to set those certain to stereo. Okay, so where was I? Oh yeah, I'm on Foley. I don't want Foley. So I'm going to go to Atmos. And in fact, Atmos, chances are, long environmental sound, particularly a library sound, it's going to be stereo rather than kind of dialogue and Foley, which would be mono sources. So can you see this little circle next to input 1? Will it show me what it says? Yeah, we go. Channel mode, which is mono. One single circle means monophonic, which means the sound comes from one source. I'm doing that because if you listen to a mono sound on headphones, it appears the sound is coming just there. I either will be playing you or will have already played you a mono mix of a Beatles song called I Saw Her Standing There, and a stereo version of that mix to show you the difference. So you'll know what it means, or you will know soon. But I'm going to click on this to get that. Look, can you see how this here changes from that to slightly wide? That means there are two inputs. There are two VU meters to a certain extent. So in 1 and 2. So when I come to choose, I'm going to do my EQ first. Atmos. So EQ tools again. You could use keyboards for pad warmer, something like that. But I'm going to go to EQ tools and I'm going to select. I'm going to reduce mids. There we go. So we've got a bit of that up there. So for our little chirpy bird song. And if I don't like it, I can always take that down by dragging. Sorry, I'm giving you too much information here. So yeah, so those mid kind of sounds, environmental sounds, unless they, traffic can be a little bit boomy. If it's mainly traffic, I wouldn't use this patch. I would maybe have reduce bass boom. In fact, you know what? As you can see, this is not a set thing for me. I'm actually, the reason I'm doing this template is because I know that our next tutorials will be project based, where I'm going to be expecting you to do some actual sound design. And I know the type it is, so I know the kind of environmental sounds that we're going to want, which would be natural sounds predominantly. Yeah, I'll leave reduced bass boom for the time being. That'll be fine. And I can always change it. We can always change it. The thing about the digital world, the digital environment, it is entirely non-destructive. We can go back and we can tweak to our heart's content. It is both a strength and a weakness, because in the analog days, the days of tape recorders, like, you can't see it in the background. Have I got one obvious here that I can just show you? No. Here's one I brought to class. There we are. I'll bring one to class. Sort of in the era of tape recorders, you couldn't tweak so much. Once it was on tape, or once you set your EQ, that was it. You were stuck with it. Which is why you always had record neutrally in and only do EQ afterwards, which is kind of what we can do here. But we've got infinitely tweakable stuff. And that's the plus is flexibility. The downside is that you do not, people working in the digital domain, particularly people who know only the digital domain like you guys, don't tend to conceptualize what you're doing before you do it. And I think that's a lost art. And part of what I'm teaching will be to actually try and develop those skills in you. And which is why we're going to be doing stuff on tape and tape loops. And you have to see it before you do it. Anyway, again, I digress. Let's go to the compressor. Stereo, this case, because remember we've changed it from mono to stereo with the input channel. So I'm going to choose compressor stereo. You don't really need to do much compressing. So I'm going to go compressor tools. I want a light compressor. Something that's just light. Have I got anything that just says light compression? We've got lots of optos and FET. I don't have a clue what any of this stuff means, and I don't care. Nothing here springs to mind. Compressor tools. Let's have a little look. Platinum Orchestral. That'll be a light compression because it's designed to compress an orchestra which will have a variety of different frequencies. So I'm going to go for Platinum Orchestra. And I'm going to bang that down to -6 dB and switch the limiter on. Oh, I think I forgot to do that to the Foley, did I? Let's just check. Yes, I did. But as I said, infinitely flexible, so I can switch that on and I can plonk that down to, I actually might take that down to -7 dB. So my Foley never swamps my dialogue. And I might take this down to -8 dB. So my environment never swamps my Foley. There we go. So Atmos compressor, Foley compressor. Now I'm not going to put anything on my music because commercial music has been already compressed and EQ'd and stuff like that. So we don't need to do it. The only time we would do it would be if to have a special effect. So for instance, if I wanted to sound like a gramophone from the 20s, I would add an EQ effect called phone filter notch, which makes it sound like it's on a telephone, which gives me that kind of EQ range. And then I would add some distortion, and then I would find some scratch sound, and I'd lay that underneath. But that's a whole class where we look about taking neutral sounds like a voice and placing it within different environments and in different contexts. That's a whole other class, but so we'll leave that for later. The same is true for non-diegetic, so we can leave those as they are. So remember I told you, if we want to do a copy of Foley track, we've already done this and we've already done that, and we could have done one or two other bits and pieces, and it would take ages to do all that again. But if I just copy it or use this, which is new track with duplicate settings, they are identical. Yeah, which is the beauty of that system. Okay, so in fact, do you know what? I'm going to end the class there, end this tutorial, and we're going to talk about mixing and routing and send effects in tutorial 3. Whether it'll end up as tutorial 3, I don't know. It depends on the order I put them in Moodle and the structure of the class. I'm going to want us to do some creative stuff before we have to do all of these tutorials. So we'll be doing creative work in between. So I'm calling it tutorial 3, but it might well be tutorial 5 or something like that. Yeah, I'm wittering on again. Well done, everybody. Once you've done that, File, Save. And that now updates the template on your desktop. Should you wish, you can go to Save as Template and just click on the existing one that we've already done, because we're going to copy over this because this is just a development of that very basic template that we already created. Save, yeah, replace. So all of those additions now are in the template. Okay, well done. And that's it for today. Go have a cup of tea.